Hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Event Talks. My name is Deji, for those who don't know me, and I have the special honor of being your host today. Now, if you're joining us for the first time, Event Talks is an original series by Event where we host discussions with industry experts as well as thought leaders across a number of fields and disciplines. One day it could be a talk on mental health and the tools needed to navigate it. The next, it could be an expertise on HR or work tips on improving your efficiency. You truly never know what you're going to get with us. The only thing that we guarantee is that it'll be informative, educational, and entertaining. Now, in today's In Event Talks, we will be discussing education. So, actually, it goes back to one of the things that I was mentioning before, educational. We'll be discussing education in the new normal. And we're going to be discussing online versus hybrid and just how it's affecting, the current educational sector. And today with us, I have with me, well, I guess with us, I should say, our special guest speaker, Melissa Emler. And I'm going to just share a couple things about Melissa so you just kind of have an idea of who she is. Melissa is one of the owners of Modern Learners, an online network dedicated to serving school leaders and educators to change the way they teach and to facilitate learning for the future. Today, we're going to be talking to her about her journey joining Learners and building the community and coaching over 1,000 school leaders in 22 countries. Amazing. Now, she's going to share her deep insights with us about the way each of us can disrupt the way we teach, learn, and help students create their own learning journey. And this all happened after serving in K-12 public education for 20 years, where she came to this role that she has today, and being a relentless advocate for learning and being a relentless advocate for learning is at the center of every conversation she has. Maybe I might need a glass of water because this definitely doesn't happen very often. So yeah, just to get out the way. But yeah, in her work with educational service agencies and organizations that support educators, as well as with a few corporate clients building a learning culture, she noticed a pattern. So I assume this is what brought her to where she is today. And she wants to help people build a learning culture. And to do that, she has realized that we must embrace the interdependencies of community, content, and events. At Modern Learner, she has been there since 2016, and her experience has proven to be really helpful to her clients. And at this point, because I'm not the only person here today, I'm going to call on Melissa just to say thank you very much for being with us today. And we are very grateful to have you.
Well, thanks for having me. And the intro is great. It's funny to hear people talk about me using the things that I've written and done. And I'm just really excited to talk about it, talk about learning. And I'm excited to be with an event because, first of all, I love this technology that we're using. And I can tell that your team does a lot of things really, really well. So it's great to be here for sure.
So I'm just going to start with just understanding a little bit about what led you to this journey, right? So you've been in public education for about 20 years, K-12 public education, and I
Mhm.
kind of just want to know what led you into a journey into education. Like, why was that a thing for you?
Um, this is going to sound really bad, but the first reason that comes to my mind is that I was a bossy child. And, so I always played school at home because and actually this is a huge part of the evolution, and this is the first time I've ever told the story, but I always played school at home. It was like what I did as a child because it was an important thing in my life, apparently. And at the end of the year, when the teachers would be getting new textbooks and new teacher manuals, the following year they would give away their existing stuff. And I was always the first person in line for the teacher manual because I played school at home all the time. And so it was to be a teacher was just something that I always saw myself doing. And it could have been because I was a bossy child and the teacher always had control. Um, so that could potentially be it. But as I've journeyed through education, I realized that the best teachers actually relinquish control and inspire inquiry and questioning and learner agency.
Mm,
When they relinquish that control is when they have the most success. So I'm actually on a journey now to sort of let go of the control in the field of education and learning.
interesting. But I'm
Yeah.
curious, so just speaking about control, are there any specific, I guess, experiences that you can point to that just sort of made you feel like relinquishing control was going to be important? Oh, I've lost Melissa there.
Well, I'm here. I can hear you. I think that for a long time, all of the classroom management issues that I had in my first couple of years of teaching were because I was trying to control what learners were doing and what they were experiencing. And of course, the more you try to control something, the less control that you have. And so it didn't matter what I did to achieve whatever the outcome is that I was expecting. Um, if the kids pushed back, it wasn't going to happen. So I had to really work on my teaching skills to ask more questions and provide fewer answers, because if I was doing all of the talking or if I was doing all of the thinking, then that was actually taking away from the learner's experience, and I wanted to not do that, obviously. And so just over time, I started to get much better at asking questions and posing good problems and tasks that kids were intrigued enough to want to solve. And then as I sort of advanced in my career in the field of education and went into the principalship and curriculum and special education directorship, basically, what I learned to be true about relinquishing control to the learners continued to be true for teachers, because I believe that teachers need to see themselves as learners first. And so, again, my goal to ask them more questions and give them more inquiry tasks helped in actually teachers seeing themselves as learners and actually digging deeper into the work. I often say, I'm not asking you to change, I'm asking you to learn. And as a person in educational leadership, that has proven to be a mantra that people really resonate with, because lots of people don't like to change, and the world is changing. Education is absolutely changing. But if you invite people to learn, then the change will inevitably happen when they recognize the need for it. So again, I often say, I'm not asking you to change, I'm asking you to learn. And again, I think that's my um, quest to relinquish control is just even evident in my mantra.
Nice, nice. That is a lovely mantra, and funny, just listening to you speak, it just kind of, I guess, enlightens me a bit more about, like, how information can sort of make the change without, like, you actively having to insist on it. Just coming to more information and just having a better understanding of things will ultimately produce that change in, I guess, behavior or,
Mhm.
action that you're looking for, because then they will know for themselves, and I think that's a really incredible way to approach it.
Yeah, and the
Um,
other piece that's really
Go on.
important in that approach is the lived experience side of it. So we were talking before we got on about climate change and sort of being in the middle of that debate, because we all bring
Yeah.
our different lived experiences to that learning, and those lived experiences plus the combination of information and knowledge, they really combine to impact our perspective on lots of different things, and that's what makes the world go round, is that ebb and flow and honoring people's lived experiences in whatever it is they're learning or working through.
Yeah, I know, and just even piggybacking off of that, so thinking about, like, the online sphere and, like, how it affects education, are these some of the
Mhm.
issues that you encounter as far as, like, connectivity issues, maybe even issues with on your student sides, for example, your learner side, that just kind of affect the smoothness, I guess, of the process, or, like, even the communication that occurs?
Well, absolutely, and it's so multifaceted. So, when COVID happened, I happened to have been one of the educators who probably, had I had my own classroom, thrived in an environment like that, because I had been using several different learning management systems in order to communicate with learners and collect, share learning opportunities and collect student work and things like that. But I think what got messy during the um, pandemic was, again, it got messy because people were trying to control things that they couldn't control. And that was evidenced in the fact that Zoom school became a thing. We thought we could just take what happened in our classrooms and Zoom it to our kids, and the same thing would happen when they were at home in their bedrooms or closets or who knows where, when they were
Yeah.
trying to share their living space and their internet with 3, 4 siblings and parents at home working. And we still, school people really still thought that it would be a good, effective idea to do asynchronous online Zoom school learning. It
Crazy.
probably just didn't work
Yeah.
because of internet and bandwidth issues. It also didn't work because there's this thing that was dubbed as Zoom fatigue, right? So Zoom as a brand, they're getting lots of recognition. Zoom is just the brand. It's like Kleenex, right? Everybody understands it now, but it's really
Yeah.
just video conferencing. There's a piece of fatigue in there that we didn't account for as adults trying to facilitate learning. And it was our need to control time, space, minutes, all of those pieces in during the pandemic that really made for a step backwards in regards to ed tech. So
Interesting.
it should have been a time where ed tech flourished, but actually ed tech really took a step back because the focus of the tools that started to be created went back to being tools that actually strive for more control over
Mm.
a learning experience. And
Yeah.
again, I didn't know that this was going to become a theme to talk
I
about
love it.
control and
I love
compliance. Um,
it.
that is essentially one of the very well, it's at the center of all education, and usually in a school system, there's a lot of control and compliance measures that are absolutely unconnected to learning. And the same happened in hybrid learning. And we have to really take a deep look at what we're trying to control and when we should measure for that outcome. And again, Zoom school probably isn't the answer. If you have the opportunity to give learners more agency in their learning, they will likely go deeper than you had originally anticipated.
Yeah.
Um, it's a thing. So the other thing is when you're thinking about purchasing educational technology or any learning technologies, you really have to identify if you're purchasing a learning technology or a teaching technology. And you have to
Interesting.
ask the question, where is the agency of the tool? Who is the tool giving power to? Is it giving power to the learner? Is it giving power to the system? Or is it giving power to the teacher? And so in hybrid learning environments, when you look at a learning management system, depending on which learning management system you go with, there are district benefits to having a district or a system wide learning management tool. There are also learner benefits to having a learning management tool because of the ease of use and ability to navigate. And it also makes things easier for the teacher. So in the case of a learning management system, there is agency for all of the different levels in schools. But when you're thinking about an app that sits on top of Zoom that will measure how many times the pupils hit the webcam or how many minutes they spent in Zoom. Anytime you're trying to measure a behavior or something like that in learning, you're really shifting the agency to the teacher and
Mm.
giving more control to the teacher, which means we're focused on teaching, not learning. And so
Yeah.
that's a void.
Yeah, fair enough. That's a power imbalance that I've never considered ever. I think obviously being in education pre-COVID and I guess pandemic measures, it just wasn't something that you would ever consider. But that's such an interesting and viewpoint and very enlightening and insightful. So I'm just gonna pivot slightly away because I
Mhm.
kind of want to hear a bit more about like the good sides of education
Mhm.
as well, I guess, especially in this era. So my next question then would be, what is the most beautiful thing that has happened to you working in education? So what is one of those things that you, or even just it could be a group of things that you look on and just really warms your heart? Because I know that being in education, there's the potential for a lot of that to happen.
Yeah, so I, was an English teacher, and then I became a special education teacher. And as a special education teacher, I had several students who taught me more about learning than I ever knew before
Mm,
I had met them. And the most beautiful thing is when you believe all learners can learn and you do whatever you can to remove the barriers and they thrive. I once
mm,
had a student who, because of a reading disability, was listening To Kill a Mockingbird in an audio version while he was doing pre calculus. Um, and it is the way his brain works that and I tried to control that situation and I tried to say, "Now, do you think this is a good idea? Like, I don't think you can do both of those things at the same time." My brain certainly wouldn't do my brain wouldn't do pre-calc to start with. It certainly wouldn't do pre-calc while listening to Kill a Mockingbird.
absolutely.
And, he proved me wrong. He did very well on the discussion for To Kill a Mockingbird, and he
Wow,
managed to get through pre-calc with very little challenge. So,
wow,
I think that learners have way more assets and abilities than we ever give them credit for,
yeah.
and seeing that come alive is the whole reason I do all of the work that I do.
That is lovely. That is lovely. And in line with control as well, one of the things that I think that just keeps coming up in this conversation is challenging your biases. You know, it just feels
Mhm.
like as an educator, you have no there is no room to ever hold on to any sorts of biases because every child is different, every student is different, every learner is different. And that's very interesting to say the least.
And the
Um
same is true for teachers, right? So it is not realistic to think that all learners will connect with all teachers or
mm,
that all teachers are need to be in deep relationships with all of their learners. Certainly, they need to design their instruction to meet the needs of all learners, but we have to understand that humans come with a significant amount of variability, and it is the connections that we make with each other, regardless of how um, deep or like it's the connections. They don't have to be perfect relationships in every avenue in schools. And sometimes that becomes the expectation of teachers is to love and save every child. And in reality, the teacher has a job to do, and the job is to design instruction that meets the needs of all learners. And being in relationship with the learners is a huge benefit, but it's also a misnomer to think that every teacher and every student will get along. It's just not feasible. And I think sometimes we have to embrace that and recognize that learners need a lot of teachers, and a lot of their teachers might not even be in school. And are we honoring those experiences, those learning experiences that don't happen inside of the school building? And when we do, we see lots of things come together.
thanks.
Mhm.
Thanks for sharing that. This has been oddly emotional in a way. It's very, like, inspiring, and I just keep like, listening to it, I keep thinking about stuff in my personal school experiences, so that's why sometimes I might be a little slow to answer, but this has been extremely insightful, and just pivoting to another aspect of it, so over the course of doing research for this talk, we saw that you offer, an online course twice a year, Change School, I believe,
Yes.
um, and I would love to hear a bit more about this, so can you tell us just a bit more about what Change School is?
Right. Absolutely. So first of all, there are lots of people doing really good work um, in trying to impact education and educational policy. And there are lots of people creating brand new teaching and learning environments, and lots of people who want to start their own school to get away from the existing school. And the reality of it is that the majority of our students, at least in the United States and Canada, are in public schools. And so, if we really want to create a system that does the most and the best that it can for our learners, we have to impact the schools that already exist in order to have the biggest impact on the most number of students. And so, a lot of what happens in Change School is we explore and examine the very conversation that we started this conversation with, but it's the shift from a focus on teaching to a focus on learning, and a shift in who are the learners in our schools. So I see everyone in a school as a learner, which means we need to design learning experiences that meet the needs of adults and kids. And the other piece of Change School, we really work to um, reevaluate where our priorities are. We look at distinctions, like we ask people to compare and contrast achievement and learning, because so much of the work that we do in schools is striving for an achievement outcome. And achievement is a very point in time measurement, but learning is ongoing and there's no end, and there's not necessarily a point to be measured for learning. And so we don't believe that schools will ever be absent of at least a conversation about achievement. But we also, in the work of Change School, really get to an understanding that achievement in and of itself is a mechanism for sorting students. And so, if we have a mission statement that says we want to serve all students and create an environment where all students see themselves as lifelong learners, then we have to do our work and shift the focus to learning, and really work to understand those distinctions. And so that's what happens in Change School, which is an 8-week cohort-based course where it's a very interesting hybrid model. So we have modules available. We have, Change School is 6 modules, and there is asynchronous online articles and piece things to read and to listen to and to interact with. And then we gather once a week in a virtual video conference, and we connect and have conversations around the key anchoring ideas in the text and media that we shared throughout the module. And so it is the work in the gathering that helps people make sense of the distinctions and the change that we're seeking. So again, it goes back to, I'm not asking you to change, I'm asking you to learn. And that is essentially the work of Change School.
Thank you very much for sharing about that. And that just feels like one of those quotes that I'm going to hold on to forever. And I will give you credit, but it's such an awesome quote. I'm not asking you to, no, honestly, it is. It is. I'm not asking you to learn. It's one of those things that is definitely going to be one of the biggest takeaways from this. But even just listening to you speak about hybrid learning, this kind of leads me to my next question. And I'm just going to set it up first, and then I'll
Mhm.
ask you and see what your response is. So while the world is beginning to enjoy a sense of normality, teaching and training have been transformed forever. The days of brick and mortar only education have set, and organizations and educational institutions are exploring different avenues. Educational technology opportunities are numerous, and with so many options, it is normal to ask ourselves which is the best option. Now, even in that light, it's never been a better time to be a hybrid learner, like you said. And if you're
Mhm.
gearing up for a course that's not in person, you may wonder what's the difference between online learning versus hybrid learning. So online courses take place 100% online, and hybrid classes blend in-person and online learning. These two educational formats might be similar, but we'd like to go a bit more in depth. Having said that, Melissa, what are the benefits of hybrid over online learning, and how can you choose which is right for you?
Well, I think learning is social. That is the biggest difference. And online learning, when designed well and in an appropriate tool, you can have some social interaction um, in discussion feeds and things like that that we're very familiar with. Although I will point out that writing is often a barrier to communicating for many to communicating what they've learned. And
Interesting.
so it really limits the action unless it's very well designed. It has a bend towards ableism. And if you are able to learn online, then it might be a great piece. But there are so many people with a variety of learning disabilities that online learning becomes a challenge because it's very heavily text based. Many people are getting better at adding audio and video into those pieces. But again, it's a matter of speed, right? Like those of us who are very able readers can read through content really quickly as compared to watching a significantly lengthy video. The hybrid learning opportunity where you have some online and some in person together gives you the opportunity to manage the time that you invest to learn something. And people don't recognize this, but so much time can be saved by having conversation and connecting around concepts with other people. And so before we had this conversation, you may never have considered the control element of school. You may never have considered the comparison and contrast between achievement and learning. And when you explore those concepts with other people in a hybrid way, you are able to go deeper. But at the same time, the reason hybrid is so valuable is because right now we keep learners in school in a 8 to 3:30 kind of manner, right? There's a school day, and there are lots of minutes in that school day that are void of anything of real value other than it's just what we do. Um, and so hybrid allows us to sort of manage the learning time. It allows us to work with others to make sense of what we're learning. And it allows us to do the knowledge capturing and delivering at a time that works in our lives. So I don't know. There's so much more probably, but that's where I'm
Yeah,
landing.
fair enough, fair enough. Thanks for that. I guess my next question then would be, it's a bit similar, but I was just wondering if you could kind of like maybe do a little delineation between the two. So we kind of spoke about the benefits of hybrid over online learning. So now I kind of want to know what the benefits of hybrid and online learning are compared to classroom learning, being that you've experienced both.
Yeah. And it goes right back to the time because we create a lot of barriers for a lot of learners by having school so closely aligned to time requirements, right? So in the US, many states have they have attendance rules. You have to be in health classes so many minutes and physical education so many minutes. You have to have so many minutes of reading. Uh, and in high schools, that's tied to graduation credits. Now, those things are likely not going away, but when you're thinking about moving to a hybrid environment, it's that thing that it's time that is set up differently than it was before. And it can be, in some people's eyes, it can be saved or it can be used for different things. But in school, when you physically go to school, there are relationships that cannot be like you cannot have relationships in the way that they are built in a regular school day, in a hybrid learning environment without a lot of attention spent on building those relationships when you come together. So I never want to say that time in schools is wasted because it's not. It's just that we have to make sure that we recognize what's being done in schools. And what's being done in schools is spending time on building relationships. Now, that doesn't always pan out because not everyone has the same quality of relationships. So, again, I think
Seems
it.
like we've had Melissa go to the backstage. Just very quickly, we'll get her back on.
Oh, okay, sorry. I haven't
Yeah,
moved, I don't think.
yeah. No, I don't, it wasn't your fault. I think that might have been us. Sorry
Okay,
about.
no worries. So again, in school, in case we missed this, in school, I never want to say that time is wasted because time is not wasted in school. Time, we just have to understand what the goal of the time is. So when we physically go to a building, the goal is to learn, but also to cultivate relationships. And as long as you have those healthy relationships in that school, there's a reason to be there. I like hybrid learning because it gives us better management of the clock and it allows us to spend more time purposefully building those relationships around the concepts that we're learning about.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Hopefully
Mhm.
this thing doesn't have we don't have too many more issues completing this and we can just,
No
sail on
worries.
through.
Yeah.
Um, so one of the questions that I was gonna ask, just piggybacking off of the other question that you answered. So in your job, you help people build strong learning organizations by designing and executing online and hybrid events and creating strong communities. So that was something that you stressed about education and learning just being very social. So building strong communities wrapped around the event. So that kind of makes me want to ask, what role do events play in the learning process?
So I have a good friend in the field of education. His name is Gary Stager, and he's spoken all over the world. And my favorite quote that he says is teachers need to inspire kids to learn about things they didn't know they loved.
Hmm.
And so, events, I believe, even in the field of education and so the events that I typically work with are learning events. I'm not necessarily talking about a concert or a theatrical performance or anything like that. I'm speaking specifically about learning events. And I believe that they're there to inspire people to want to know more about things they didn't know they wanted to know more about.
That makes sense.
And so our goal is then to recruit people to the learning and retain them in the learning. And as long as the content is there to deepen the learning or inspire the learning, the event will do exactly what you want it to do.
That clarifies that for me. Thank you. And also just even the learning events, because I was wondering if I wasn't thinking concert, but I was just wondering what types of events would inspire learning in that way. But I guess following up on that, how can we guarantee that the learning continues long after the events? Could you possibly give us some tips?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. Because lots of people have equated events with community. Like, if you have an event, then you have a community. And I don't necessarily believe that to be true. Um, but I think that the learning after the event, the learning can take on a path of its own. You may have inspired somebody that shares what they've learned, and it sparks an entire conversation and subsequent events and subsequent learning opportunities that never really make its way back to the initial event for many, many people. Um, but to ensure that it keeps going is really to just make sure that you inspire people to want to know more about things they didn't know they wanted to know more about. And that means you have to be really intentional about the experience at the event. And lots of times we just think we're just going to pop in and have a conversation, but the amount of intention that your team put into even this conversation was significant. And because everything about it is intentional, the the technical issues that we may have experienced are just a blip in the wind. The
Yeah.
content is still here and it is still valuable. And people who are watching or watch the replay will take that with them. And where it lands, we may not ever know, but we have to be confident in knowing that our goal is to inspire people to want to learn more. And if we do that, they will.
Yeah. Okay. So just essentially trusting in the process that you've created.
Oh, that's a great word. Trust. You can't control it. You have
Mm,
to trust it.
mm. These are, in as much as this is a conversation about education, these are honestly just incredible nuggets for life. Especially about relinquishing control. That is definitely one that has really stuck with me, and I'm just making notes this entire time, trying to take note of everything that you've said. Um, so I guess my next question, just following on that now, is, what do you think users really want from the hybrid environments of the future?
I am dying to know the answer to this question. I can honestly say I don't know. There's so much talk about the metaverse, and there's so much talk about, um, yeah, I'm not even sure. But what I think that they want from the events of the future is connection to people and humans, and they want to they want to be inspired. They
Mhm.
want events to bring them joy. And I think that sometimes we have to be really, we have to go against what we typically want to do, because when we bring people together for events, hybrid or online or in person, when we bring people to events, those of us that are designing the events feel like we have this limited amount of time and we have to give them everything they need all at once. And we become this fire hose of content. And that doesn't bring a lot of joy. That
Yeah.
brings a lot of heaviness and overwhelm. And so I didn't know I was going to say this, but I think that events need spaciousness. They need time. They need an ease. And the goal isn't to like fire hose all the content out. The goal is to inspire people to want to learn more. And that is then the work is to help them plan how they will learn more. So the goal of the event is to bring people together, inspire them to learn more, and support them in knowing what their next learning step is. And I think that's what people want, the spaciousness to be inspired and to learn.
Sounds a lot like freedom as well. People would
Mhm.
appreciate more freedom and feel like they're being controlled less, possibly.
Yes, so the word in education that we've been using is agency.
Agency, that's a lovely word.
They want more agency to make decisions for themselves about the experience. And it's okay that it's in a container, that the experience exists in a container, but they wanna make decisions about what happens in the container so
Yeah.
that they can make because when they leave the container, they do have all the agency in the world, to do what they may with what happens inside of the container. But if it's too rigid inside of the container, the impact outside of the container is far less.
Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. And agency, I just keep coming back to that word. And it also leads me to the next question that I was going to ask, because alongside agency, what are some of the trends, in your opinion, that are driving the deployment of digital learning technologies? And this is going to be one of my final two questions, I promise, because I know we've taken a lot of your time.
It's
But I'm
okay.
just wondering, what are some trends that you think are driving the deployment of digital learning technologies?
Well, one of the trends right now is definitely that tools are being created to enhance the synchronous uh, video chatting, whatever, what we're doing here. There's lots of emphasis um, being put on creating tools to sit on top of our video conference platforms. And my caution, because I know that's a huge trend, my caution is that to those creators that are building those things, when you are thinking about all the features that you are building for teachers, what disadvantages are you creating for the learners? because of the emphasis on power that you're giving to the teachers. So, in giving teachers more power and control, what are you taking away from learners? And that has to be a question both in everything that's being built on top of video conferencing, but also in just ed tech in general. When you give power control to the teacher, what are you taking away from the learner and the experience of the learner?
Thank you. Thank you
What's the
very.
overall impact of that?
Yeah, yeah. Just also once again coming back to control. I love it. I love it. I never knew the control was such a common theme in the world of education. I guess also is a metaphor for life in its own way. But I think I'm going to end on this. And this is a question that we typically ask just to kind of get a bit more personal and have an understanding of, the guests that we have and just pre into their lives a bit more. It's a bit of a gossipy question, but I'd love to know. Who are the three most inspiring people alive for you?
Oh, goodness.
That's the reaction. That's
Yes,
always
it seems so daunting.
it
Um,
is.
yeah, so the 3 most inspiring people, well, I'm gonna start with my grandma.
Okay.
She's 83 and she looks 51, and
Oh
she gives
wow.
me a complex about getting wrinkles as I get older because she's amazingly beautiful. Um, but she's always lived by the "kill them with kindness"
Mm,
mantra, and she's, like, wildly successful.
interesting.
So she's an inspiration and always will be. And then when I think about, like, the big picture, um, I definitely love Brené Brown. I love her work. On my favorite Brené Brown is The Wilderness, about belong. And that book is all about belonging. And in addition to her, I have a famous, a not so famous, I mean to say, friend in the business world, but she's just released a book called What Works, and her name is Tara McMullen, and I love her What Works book and the premise of it because it is about how we use like goal setting. It's an alternative way to think about goal setting, and everything that Tara McMullen puts out into the world in regards to her content is fascinating. And as you say, you'd never really thought about control in education. She is the person that inspires me to think about things in business and in life that I hadn't even considered until she brought it to my attention. And so
That's
she's my not so famous business connection that really inspires me, but she does have a book and y'all should check it out. It's amazing.
definitely. And don't worry, we're not accusing you of name dropping. If you know famous people, you know famous people. It's just what it
Yeah,
is. And it feels
for
like a
sure.
common thread that kind of ties between those is like people you can learn from, and I guess that's the ultimate idea of inspiration. Just
Yeah.
always finding people that you want to just take things from their lives and sort of implement into yours. And also just even coming back full circle and speaking about learning environments, it feels like inspiration just seems to be one of the common themes, I'm giving learners and I guess educators likewise, just learning from this conversation, the opportunity to learn and be inspired. And I'm definitely inspired after this conversation. And I appreciate you, Melissa, for coming on. This has been, and I'm not saying this just because you're here, this has been one of the more enjoyable in event talks that we've had. I've been engaged the entire time. It's just been a thrill. And I'm so glad that you made the time out for us today.
Well, thanks so much for having me, and I love to chat with anybody about learning.
I can tell it's something that you're very passionate about, and it feels like one of those things that if you were woken up from sleep and just like talk about learning, it feels like you could do it effortlessly. But yeah, I'm so grateful that you're here with us today, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you after this and just sort of seeing what else it is that you get up to, because I'm sure like there's just so much that I can glean from you as well. And thank you to everyone who's joined us, and thank you always for supporting in event talks and supporting in event in general. We really appreciate you guys. The final word for me is going to be a quote from Melissa that says, "I'm not asking you to change, I'm asking you to learn," is a quote that I'm definitely going to take moving forward. If there's anything that you want to end on, Melissa, please let us know. We would love to hear from you again.
I think that's the perfect place to end. I'm not asking you to change. I'm asking you to learn.
Thank you so much, Melissa. We appreciate it. And once again, we're going to be having in event talks probably next week. We usually have these on a weekly basis, but we're looking forward to having you guys with us again. This should be an amazing time. Next week or the next time that we're on should be just as amazing as this one. And we are sure that you're going to love it. But for now, this is me signing out. Have a wonderful rest of your day.